Welcome to Day 7 of the Cardiovascular DocuClass. Today we'll focus on how to avoid a heart attack with 4 great presentations for you. First up, Dr. Edward Group provides an amazing overview about how digestion really influences heart function. In addition, Dr. Group will explain how to improve blood circulation and heart function naturally with his number 1 tip. And as you probably know by now, bad gut bacteria can eventually lead to contaminated blood, which is why Dr. Group has an important message about the SIBO-gut connection and how to avoid this threat to your heart. Enjoy this presentation with Dr. Edward Group. Dr. Group, I can't believe I'm sitting here with you looking at, I think, a little over a year since we did the Fatty Liver DocuClass, and it goes by like a blink of an eye. Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, it's always so awesome to be here. I really enjoy, all of our conversations, and wow, it's just amazing that you're doing all this for humanity, so thank you.
Yeah, and it's a big effort. I know we almost had a hurricane wipe us out this time, but thankfully you're here from Texas, so thanks again. So let's talk about this. This is important. We got a lot of people concerned about their heart. Conventionally speaking, I'm going to say the obvious. There's something wrong with your heart. Let's stare right at your heart. The arteries around the heart. Don't even look at the veins. But then the gut. Here it is, we're sitting with each other. We're going to talk about the gut. And conventionally speaking, most people aren't pointing that way. But there's a lot to be said about this, right?
Yes, one thing I've learned over the last 25 years is really looking at simplicity, because if you look at science and you look at the allopathic model, just like you said, somebody comes in with heart pain or arrhythmia or anything for that matter associated with their heart. What do the doctors do? They look at the symptoms instead of the root cause, and then they just exactly what you said, focus on the heart. What I've done over the years, and many natural practitioners, is kind of look at the whole body approach. And what I've found is you always, regardless of what you're suffering from, need to look at your external and your internal environment. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so if we're looking at the heart, what could actually affect the heart from your external environment? Well, watching negative things on the news can affect your heart. The air you breathe can affect your heart. The food that you're putting in your system, that would be internal environment. Another thing is, really, if you're wanting to become a good doctor, what I've found is not necessarily, it's good to have a background in anatomy and to know how the body functions and the biochemistry of the body, but that's science-based. What I'm learning and still continuing to learn is you have to look at the vibrations, you have to look at the energy, you have to look at the emotions, you have to look at everything else that is surrounding or that bubble that each person lives in. And everybody's different. Everybody has their own external environment and their own internal environment. So how does that affect the heart? Well, if you look at the external environment, you want to look at, okay, where does that person live? Is their home toxic? What does their relationships look like? Are their relationships toxic? What does their spiritual life look like? Are they spiritual? Are they not spiritual? That can also affect the heart, because when we look at the heart, we're looking at like a parasympathetic versus a sympathetic. However, if you look at the internal environment on what somebody might be putting in their system, it all comes down to really the simplicity of how toxic is your external environment and how toxic is your internal environment. And when you look at the heart, or what affects the heart, if you say, what damages the heart, what creates the heart to beat irregularly, what creates plaquing in the arteries, what creates varicose veins, spider veins. I mean, your heart is going to supply the blood and the oxygen to every single cell and every single tissue in the body. But I never look at the heart, because how does the heart become toxic? That's the question that I ask. And when you look at the amount of chemicals and the amount of toxins and the amount of negative emotions and the lack of mindfulness and the lack of calming and the environment in which most people are living in a sympathetic state, and that means a state of anxiety, a state of fear, a state of high heart rate, then you have to ask yourself what's causing that. And what I've found is if you look at the amount of chemicals and the amount of toxins that someone is consuming on a daily basis through the air, the food, the water, you might also have been in an accident, you have some neurological issues because your spine is out of position. You might be exposed to high levels of electromagnetic frequencies in your external environment. All of those contribute to the root cause of why you might be having heart conditions. However, where are all those things coming from? They're all coming from the gut, because that's your first exposure point. That is the place that every practitioner should look first, regardless of whatever symptom that people are associated with.
Common sense tells us what you're saying makes perfect sense, because people talk all the time to each other. Forget about medicine for a second. Don't eat when you're upset. But now if you talk to doctors, all doctors tend to say too quickly, you've got these heart issues, you got high blood pressure, you really should reduce your stress. And then out the door they go. They're never really unpacking more the importance of what you're talking about.
Right, so if you look at, let's say someone's bringing in 1 million chemicals and toxins on a daily basis, but their body is only able to eliminate 500,000 toxins and chemicals on a daily basis. Then you have to ask yourself, why is that? Well, we only have 5 elimination routes. Men have 4 elimination routes. You're going to breathe them out, which has to do with the heart rate. You're going to sweat them out, which has to do with the heart. You're going to have to urinate them out, which has to do with the heart, pushing the blood through the kidneys to clarify and produce pure urine. And then with women, you're going to have your menstrual cycle. So you're going to have your elimination routes. However, if your elimination routes are blocked because you're not exercising enough, you're not drinking enough water, that's another big thing for the heart and the gut. You're not eating the right foods, you're not urinating enough, you're not defecating enough. And with women, with their menstrual cycle, then your elimination routes are going to be blocked. And you're going to start accumulating all these chemicals and toxins.
And then you go into that sympathetic state that you say, everybody can understand what we're talking about here. This heightened sense of fear and anxiety that's going on today. It's why I'm doing this docu class. I feel like everyone's going to have their heart hurting so much more if they're not careful. They're not breathing. Deep breathing, which you just mentioned as well. Just not getting in enough air. Not exercising is helping with that as well, but talk about all your detoxification pathways being blocked. That's clear.
Yeah, so what happens actually is with a state of being in a sympathetic state or a state of stress, your digestion stops pretty much. So that means you're still eating all of this food and you're consuming all this toxic junk, and you're taking in alcohol, most people. You're taking in lots of red meat, most people. You're taking in lots of sugars, genetically modified foods. All of this stuff ends up burning holes through the gut lining. It creates a toxic gut. And when that happens, guess what? All of these things start leaking into the bloodstream. And that's where you start getting the damage to the heart. And not only that, but we didn't even talk about harmful organisms. One of the things that I'm seeing, and many practitioners have been seeing a massive toxicity with, especially over the last 10 years. And that means bacteria, viruses, fungus, mold, worms, anything, any type of harmful organism that's going to be affecting you. And so that's how all of this stuff gets into the bloodstream. And then, of course, some of it goes to the liver. But when you are accumulating so many chemicals and toxins into your body on a daily basis, the liver becomes congested. And when the liver becomes congested, guess what? It can't process all that. Right now, my estimate is that most people's liver is only functioning 15%. And we've talked a lot about liver in your liver, fatty liver docu-class, and I recommend everybody see that. But that also is directly related to the heart. So guess what? You have all these chemicals and toxins that are circulating through your circulatory system, and the gut and the heart talk to each other. I mean, the heart is basically saying, hey, could you do something about getting rid of this, telling the liver and the stomach, and the liver and the stomach are basically giving the person signs and symptoms like headaches and constipation and bloating and gas, saying, hey, hello, wake up. Please listen to us. We're trying to send you a message that you're putting chemicals and toxicity into the body. So that is the root. That's what I've found in my research is really the root cause of all cardiac and heart conditions. It's a very close relationship between the gut and the heart and the liver. They all work in unison with each other as well as the detoxification pathways. So if you're consuming and your toxic threshold is above what your own God-given self-healing mechanism can handle, because we actually have a self-healing mechanism that is really, really powerful, and that's what keeps us from getting sick. That's what keeps everything in balance. It's what keeps everything in a state of homeostasis. However, when we factor in all of these other issues like the EMF and the negative emotional state, shame, also anxiety, jealousy, anything that lowers our vibrational frequency, all that does is shut down or limit all of our normal pathways of being able to eliminate effectively.
Again, it just sounds like such common sense, grounded in good science. But to keep it simple and to make sure that everybody stays with us in this conversation, even conventionally speaking, they say inflammation is the root of all disease. You can't have chronic inflammation and expect to have a healthy life. So everything you just talked about, poor relationships, a horrible mindset, the guilt, the anger, the resentment, all the toxins that go in, that we do have a choice about what we do, and we just need to figure out for each person, what is it that I'm going through that I need to kind of cut down. But all this toxicity causes this inflammation, causes this damage first, then there's inflammation to try to protect us, and then if it goes on long enough, more and more damage to our cardiovascular system and our heart. This is what a lot of people are going through.
It just really creates an imbalance in the heart. Well, it creates an imbalance everywhere in the body for that matter, but I mean the gut lining is really one of the most important things to look at, and it just comes back to simplicity like you said. I mean, think about everything has already been given to us in nature. We've shifted so far into science and we have to look at clinical trials for everything like that, but in reality, you could heal your heart, you could heal your gut, you could heal anything by just 4 or 5 of the simplest things that have been given to us for free. For example, water on the earth, right? 80% of the earth is water. Everything living contains water. Drinking pure, clean water flushes your system, helps you get rid of toxins, hydrates your system. That's another thing with heart disease that we're seeing is the dehydration effect. I mean, if you look at most people's blood under a dark field microscope, you're going to see rouleau where the red blood cells stick to each other. Probably 95% of the time you're going to see that. We have a society that's massively dehydrated because they're not drinking pure, clean water and they're not drinking enough. We're living on coffee, alcohol, tea, processed juices, milk, all the things that actually cause and create inflammation within the system. So what we have in simplicity is clean air, sunlight. I mean, sunlight is amazing for the heart, for the gut, to calm you down. You can do sun gazing, the stimulation of practically all the neurological pathways in the body. we've eliminated that. And all this has been done on purpose, by the way, over the years. We've eliminated the things that God has given us to create health, which is the clean water, the clean air that we're supposed to breathe. I mean, air is super important. I mean, people have lost the ability to breathe. They've forgotten how to breathe. They shallow breathe, and they don't breathe clean air because they're not going out in nature enough. They're not going where water is and breathing the high ionic, pure, clean air that goes in and helps to detoxify the body, detoxify the lungs. And when you breathe in through the lungs also, that goes straight into your bloodstream as well. So when you're taking away the nature of things and you take away the clean air and the clean water, and the next thing that we have is the clean food that grows naturally in a beautiful, balanced soil. And when you take that away and you start replacing that with processed foods, and you start replacing that and feeding animals all kinds of, shooting them up with antibiotics and feeding them all kinds of chemicals and genetically modified foods, that energy signature from those animals and that meat actually goes and creates negative influences and frequencies within your system too.
So let's do a hot tip for somebody, unpacking everything you just said in 2 minutes or so. People who are concerned about their cardiovascular system and they want to kind of pull things together a little bit more. And I learned about this over 30 years ago in the macrobiotic community, where at first, with all my university training, all my science, QRS, T-Wave, all the exercise physiology stuff I studied, working with high-performance athletes, I knew muscles, I knew bones, I knew physiology, all of this stuff. What are they talking about? I would see everybody pause for a moment before eating and give thanks. Like, all right, some spiritual thing going on. Like going back to what you said, switching from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Take a break for a moment. What I mentioned earlier about never eat when you're upset. So the gut and how that affects the heart, it's going to raise your blood pressure if you're screaming and yelling, and then you go to eat. If you're crazy in your head and then you go to eat even the healthiest food in the world, you're not going to digest it as well. You're not going to absorb the nutrients as well. Just take a few deep breaths, settle down, give thanks for the food that you're about to eat. What a difference that'll make. Chew your food really well. That was another thing I learned in macrobiotics that really impressed upon me. Wow, in just minutes, you can chew your food more and literally feel the nervous system change from being really up here to just really being calmer. How much better is that for your gut and your heart?
It's amazing how fast your body wants to heal and how fast your body will heal if you just start paying attention to your body and you start giving your body what it needs to survive and thrive. And that's just clean organic food, clean water, breathing properly, and reducing the stressors in your life. It really is that simple. For example, you could do a 3-day water-only fast and completely reactivate your body's immune system and generate immune stem cells. One of the best ways to heal the cardiovascular system in the heart is through water-only fasting. I mean, even intermittent fasting, just skipping a meal a day does tremendous things for your gut and your heart.
And for those who feel overwhelmed by that, I mean, that's just a matter of, let's say you have dinner 6, 7 o'clock at night. Wait to eat till 10, 11 in the morning the next day, and wow, you got intermittent fasting right there.
It's just giving your body the time to heal itself and giving your body the ability, especially when you're talking about the gut and the heart. I mean, they're basically married to each other. I would say there's 3 marriages, the heart, the liver, actually probably 4, the brain, the gut, the heart, and the liver, because they constantly communicate with each other all the time.
And even on a physical level, though, if we don't pay attention to everything you just said about getting all those things right, and the gut breaks apart, now the particles are getting in, right, that shouldn't get in. The blood is getting contaminated. Hello, cardiovascular system, blood getting toxic. The autoimmune response, the inflammation ramps up. Now we got to bring in more cholesterol. We got to bring in more plaque to patch up injured arteries. I mean, it's a vicious cycle, but we can fix this.
You could fix anything, and the thing is, it might take you 40 years to create a damaged cardiovascular system, or a damaged anything, or to get some sort of degenerative disease. But the good news is you can fix that literally within, I always like to say 90 days, because it takes 90 days to regenerate the liver. The gut, however, is just your skin turned inside out. It's made of epithelial tissue, so it heals very rapidly. As soon as you make that commitment too with your mind, and you mentioned how important the mind is, because people are not eating in a mindful state anymore. They're eating on the go. They're eating while they're watching negative things on the TV. They're looking at their phone while they're eating. They're driving while they're eating. They're eating at their desk. We've lost, that connection with ourself and that self-healing ability that we have, because we keep looking outside for the answers instead of inside for the answers.
And I love what you're saying about how fast, and we're not trying to hype this up, it's real, how fast things will change. If you get it right and your tissues start to repair, you could feel it very quickly, within days. Like you said, with a 3-day water fast. Wow.
It's again, in the simplicity, is just like asking yourself, what does my gut want to survive and thrive? What does my heart want to survive and thrive? What does my body, for that matter, want to survive and thrive? Well, it's just like, well, what is your body made of? What are the minerals in there? Your body is alive. So number one, clean water again, breathing clean air, being mindful of when you eat, and then eating clean food. And that's really the simplicity of everything. If you do that, then your body will slowly heal, and your cardiovascular system will heal. Your gut will be able to communicate correctly with your heart. See, that's another thing, is the communication between our cells. Our cells communicate, our tissues communicate, our organs communicate, and our systems communicate with each other. The neurological system communicates with the cardiovascular system. The digestive system communicates with the cardiovascular system.
You have a chiropractic background. You had said earlier that even if the spine is out of whack, it can actually impact the heart. Is that true? And the gut?
Any type of neurological, especially the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is connected all the way down your spine. It's connected to the heart. It's connected to the gut. It's connected to the liver. It's connected to the spleen. So any type of traumatic accident, they're even showing now in research that just a traumatic event in your life, like if you witness somebody die, they show images to people on the screen, and they find that just looking at negative images can affect your vagal nerve transmission, and it can actually push bones out of position. So that's also why I recommend, acupuncture, massage therapy, chiropractic. Those are all external things that you can do to balance out your body. And then with the internal of constant detoxification, constant cleansing, constant inflammation relief, those are the internal things that you can do. One of the things, though, as well, that you're talking about some of the damage that's happening to the gut lining and what's going in and what we're seeing with the heart, the gut-heart connection. One of the things we're seeing from the inflammation standpoint is the amount of bacteria and the amount of harmful organisms that are leaking through the gut into the heart. And that's why I recommend that there's really no way to avoid being exposed to harmful organisms, because they're everywhere. That's why I recommend doing a detoxification and cleansing of all of those harmful organisms from your system. And that's why I also recommend that everybody starts in the gut and starts healing the gut, because once you start healing the gut, a lot of the other tissues in the body, including the cardiovascular system, start to repair themselves. Aside from, what do you see when you go to the allopathic? Well, you have high blood pressure? What's causing your high blood pressure? They don't ever ask that. You have atrial fibrillation? What's causing that? You're under a state of anxiety and stress? What's causing that? Well, let's go ahead and send you to a psychiatrist for your anxiety and stress and put you on a fluoride-based supplement. Let's put you on blood pressure medication. Let's put you on blood thinners, to control all this stuff. Let's put you on statins. What does that do? Those are just more man-made, synthetic, toxic compounds that are covering up the symptoms but not addressing the root cause.
So shifting gears to a couple little nitty-gritty things. I know you wanted to talk about TMAO. What the heck is that?
So it's trimethylamine with an oxide group, and it's basically been studied as a component that is contributing to heart disease. And it's an endotoxin that is released from mostly people that are eating lots of red meat in their diet. And that's why, when you look at the frequency or you look at the eating red meat, it's not so much like, red meat is super bad for you, even though it is. I mean, that's a controversial issue. I always look at the quantum level of things, the vibrational level of things. What takes place when you eat red meat in the body, aside from all the chemicals and toxins and all the emotional issues that the cattle went through when they were slaughtered and all of that karmic residue that goes into the meat? But what are the other side effects of that? And it ends up being the release of inflammation producing compounds within the system. And the more of those that you have leads to chronic inflammatory disease, chronic inflammation in the cardiovascular system, chronic inflammation in the bowel. So those are just compounds that we're seeing that are endotoxins that are creating not only a negative vibrational state, but also creating toxicity within the system that needs to be removed.
And I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable, but just for a moment, we're not trying to judge anyone about the way they eat. But for sure, people are eating too much quantity of red meat, and for sure, connected to what you were talking about, too much of the very commercially raised factory farm meats that have a lot of toxicity connected to it. So again, it goes back to the person really looking at where am I putting into my body or surrounding myself with too much negative energy that's going to create this inflammation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And there's a massive amount of chemicals and toxins that are either excitotoxins or just in general toxins to the cells. I mean, anything that's harmful. I mean, there's thousands of them in the foods that we eat, through the artificial sweeteners, through the chemicals, through the pesticide residue, the herbicide residues. And nobody's studying the combination of what happens when you consume 1,000 different chemicals in your body, or 5,000 chemicals or 10,000 chemicals or toxins every single day. The definition of a toxin is just anything that's going to create damage or a reaction within your system. And that's really what it boils down to when you talk about disease or you talk about the gut or the health of your heart, is how many chemicals and toxins are you exposing yourself to every single day? And what are you doing to get rid of them every single day?
So as we finish up, Dr. Group, I know that a lot of people are very concerned about SIBO. Maybe talk for a moment what exactly SIBO is and how on earth is this connected to heart issues?
SIBO is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And that's, again, a harmful imbalance that's taking place in your microbiome in your gut. To understand how important the gut is, you have to understand that there's 4 or 5 pounds of good bacteria. I mean, it really is like a whole nother earth or a whole nother system that takes place in your gut. And what is the current situation that we're seeing is that most people's guts are way out of balance. Their microbiome is way out of balance because we need good bacteria. If we have good bacteria, that's the army for us. That's what's helping us with our thoughts and helping it keep us calm and producing neurotransmitters and really balancing out what we need for the minerals and the balance of the heart. What happens is with SIBO is you start getting an imbalance of the bad bacteria in your small intestine. And that also can lead to the bacteria leaking through into the bloodstream. And then you start having the circulatory effect of all of these bacteria that are being deposited in the tissues, deposited in the extracellular fluid, deposited in the heart. And when you have these bacteria that are going through the circulatory system, then you also have an immune response because those are a negative entity that need to be killed. So what it creates is it creates this energy that is being used and your immune system being put into overdrive all the time to deal with the imbalance or the excess bacteria that's in your system, which is another reason why it's so important to take probiotics and to eat healthy foods, because that way you always want to have a balance of your gut bacteria. If you define what is health, what is good health, it all starts with what is good gut health. And once you have good gut health, once you're able to eliminate, once you're able to process the toxins, then your body's self-healing mechanism will be reactivated and your body will be on its way to improving and getting better instead of getting degenerated.
And not to freak anybody out, but even if somebody had antibiotic usage years ago, they could just be living year after year with a compromised digestive system. So when you say probiotics, would you say for just about everybody, again, we can't practice medicine here for every person out there, but would you say for the most part, probiotics, whether it's even from the food that people eat, prebiotics, probiotics, it's a really good thing for people to focus on is fermented foods. I'm just thinking that alone. So many people just don't eat enough fermented foods, even if it's a small amount on a regular basis. It's like gone in the United States, right? It's just not a tradition anymore.
The reason why is because of the soil. I mean, the soil, everything's been killed off because of the pesticides, the herbicides, the geoengineering projects, which are spraying aluminum nanoparticles in the air. And our soil is like, the soil of the earth is equivalent to the microbiome in our gut. So like we have a layer in our gut, which is 30 feet long, and the size of a tennis court is the surface area of our intestines if you cut it open and spread it out. We should have a layer of topsoil along all of our gut lining, and that is our microbiome. It's exactly the same as the earth with soil, because if you look at a really, really good soil, it's thriving with soil-based microorganisms. And that's the ecosystem. That's the relationship that we have with the earth. We're very similar to the earth. We're almost exactly the same.
And the modern farming system, because I've talked, and I know you have too, to a lot of great farmers in this country that are desperately trying to get the message that you're talking about today out there to more people. We're decimating the soil. Monocrops year after year, the soil quality is going down. It's beyond me when you look at the label of, oh, you have vitamin A, you got vitamin C, you got all these vitamins they say are in food, but the quantity of those vitamins and minerals is so much less today because of the quality of the soil. We've got to change our farming system. We've got to gravitate more towards those farmers that respect what you're talking about.
I mean, if you really want to get back to simplicity again, it's like everybody used to have their own little garden. And you might not have all the things you need, but in a community, somebody might be growing 3 or 4 things over here, somebody else might be growing 3 or 4 other things. And you harvest those in the morning, and they still have soil on them, and you end up eating some of the soil-based microorganisms, and you end up getting the power of the energy because you are eating it fresh. You're not eating something that was picked before it was ripe. And so all of those things come into play when you're talking about repairing your microbiome. But in the world and society we live in today, we're being forced to basically take control of our own microbiome in our own body. And then so you do need to supplement your nutrients, your vitamins, your minerals, and especially your gut health with good probiotics.
Great message. Heal the gut and you'll heal your heart. Thank you so much, Dr. Grube.
Thank you.
Next up, I'd like you to meet Dr. Peter Osborne, talking about how a very big food mistake can damage your heart. Dr. Osborne goes on to explain how gluten sensitivity and celiac disease are far more than just digestive problems, and how gluten-induced gut changes increase the risk of heart damage. In addition, you'll discover which medical tests reveal serious gut-heart problems before it's too late. And finally, you'll find out about the 6 most destructive foods that slow down the reversal of heart disease. Enjoy this presentation with Dr. Peter Osborne. Okay, so Dr. Osborne, first of all, thank you very much for coming down. I know it's a big trip, especially these days with COVID and all, to do traveling from Texas, so thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I think a lot of people understand, obviously, that food affects the heart. That's a no-brainer. But I still don't think a lot of people really think much about how gluten impacts the cardiovascular system. So why don't we get into that a little bit, all right?
Absolutely. So gluten as a protein, so there's celiac disease, and then there's what is oftentimes referred to as non-gluten sensitivity or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And a lot of people don't realize the non-gastrointestinal symptoms that gluten can create. And one of them is heart disease, heart inflammation. There's a particular condition called pericarditis. And it's a swelling around the sac of the heart. And gluten can actually cause it. There's a number of research studies that corroborate that, but I've actually seen that in clients. I've seen actual episodes of severe acute pericarditis landing people in the hospital because they're gluten sensitive. This information is just not really well known. But beyond that, gluten can also contribute to cardiovascular inflammation. So not just the heart or the sac of the heart, but also the blood vessels themselves. There are a number of ways that happens. And one of the biggest is the impact gluten has on the gut with vitamins and minerals. Because it can cause damage to the GI tract, it can lead to nutritional deficit through the diet. So somebody is maybe not absorbing the nutrients, the vitamins from the food that they're eating. And over time, what ultimately ends up happening is that if those nutrients are important for the heart to generate energy, or if those nutrients are important to protect the lining of the blood vessels, then what we end up having is vascular inflammation, right? Which increases the risk for stroke and heart attacks and atherosclerosis. So you've got an inflammatory process we know gluten can cause. And you've got a nutritional deficiency catastrophe through the gut that we know gluten can contribute to. And then there's really a third mechanism, which is gluten-induced microbe changes in the gut flora, right? So we know that gluten can disrupt the gut flora, especially, and I want to emphasize this one, the people that think they're gluten-free, right? And so they go to the gluten-free food aisle, and they're buying all these processed corn and rice, fill in the blank, pasta, cereals, whatever it is. These highly processed grain-based foods feed the wrong bacteria. And so what's actually been shown is when you feed the bacteria incorrectly, you change the way the bacteria produce fats, certain types of fats, particularly short-chain fatty acids, which are very, very critical for heart health. And so you get these individuals who are eating these processed foods, altering their microbiome. The side effect of that is chemicals that actually elevate inflammation in the blood. Chemicals like leukotrienes and interleukins, these are just fancy ways of saying inflammatory mediators or inflammatory chemicals. They now start circulating through the bloodstream, creating havoc wherever they travel. So they're creating havoc to the blood vessels themselves, and we get increased risk for cardiovascular disease, but predominantly we get cardiovascular inflammation.
I think a lot of people listening to this, it sounds alarming what you're talking about, but I think it also makes a lot of sense to people that in many cases, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't know that this is going on for years and years. I mean, there's a lot that you just said that I'd like to unpack, but maybe we could start off first with, how do you know that this is going on? Is it just an assumption right away at the beginning it happens? Does it depend on somebody's genetic makeup? Are there tests that would give people a clue? Hey, you're starting to break down like what you described already.
So in the realm of cardiovascular testing, right, we have what are called predictive biomarkers, right? These are tests that measure different chemicals that are significant and help us to understand whether a person's at an increased risk. So for example, let me give you a couple of examples. There's a test called homocysteine. Homocysteine is a chemical marker. Think of homocysteine like, your car produces exhaust out of its exhaust pipe, right? And if you plug the exhaust pipe, you're going to choke. Okay, well, homocysteine is a chemical that comes out of your exhaust pipe, okay? And it's actually recycled. Your body can take homocysteine, and it has a special exhaust pipe that it runs it through to get rid of it. And that special exhaust pipe is called methylation, So if you've heard of methylation, and in the audience have heard of methylation, methylation is a process where we use B vitamins to basically change the nature of how chemicals are behaving so that we can detoxify them and put them out of the body through sweat, through urine, through the feces, etc. So this process of methylation, if it's defective or if it's not working properly because of malnutrition, remember that homocysteine as a marker for heart disease, and you can ask any cardiovascular doc, any cardiologist in the world can order homocysteine. And so the level of homocysteine should be less than 9. So if you're looking at your test result, because the lab ranges have changed, the labs have recently taken what used to be normal was less than 9, so now they're calling up to 18 normal. And that's just because every so often labs will recalibrate their reference ranges based on a sample of the population. So as the population gets sicker, the reference ranges get wider. And as they get wider, we get what's being called normal, which actually is sick. And so it's important to understand if you ask your doc to measure homocysteine, you're shooting for under 9. But if it's high, homocysteine is an independent risk factor for vascular inflammation, for heart attack, for stroke, for diabetes, for bone loss, and for cancer. So it doesn't just affect the heart. Homocysteine is not a good chemical to have in an excessive amount floating around in your bloodstream. The good news is you can lower homocysteine with B vitamins. So if you are trying to catch this early, you can ask your doctor to run the test. If it comes back high, there's 3 primary B vitamins that help lower it. Vitamin B12, folate, and vitamin B6. Now vitamin B2 can also help in that process, but the 3 big ones are B12, folate, and vitamin B6.
But just to get clear about what you said earlier, even if someone, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, starts taking supplements, somebody takes supplements, oh, I got to jump on this, I want to be proactive, but they're not paying attention to how much gluten they're having, or even like you say, some of these other healthy products in a health food store that even say they're organic, but all these grain-based foods, if they're eating a lot of that and they take B supplements as an example, it could still be problematic for somebody, right?
It could be. So that brings us to test number 2, right? If you are concerned that you might be gluten sensitive and that gluten may be contributing to heart disease for you, get a genetic test. It's a pretty simple test. Doctor can swab your cheeks, and what they're measuring are 2 different types of genes. They're measuring a gene called HLA-DQ alpha 1 and HLA-DQ beta 1. Those are the 2 genes you can have measured. Now there's certain patterns. If you have certain patterns in these 2 genes, these patterns are indicative of gluten sensitivity. Now if you have these genes, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to develop celiac disease. It's important that you understand that, because a lot of doctors don't understand the difference between, again, celiac disease and non-celiac gluten-induced inflammation. But if you have these gene patterns, here's what it means. It means that if you eat gluten, your immune system is going to perceive that protein, that gluten protein, in the grains that you're eating as a threat instead of as something that's going to nourish you. And so its response, its normal response, is going to be to produce inflammatory chemicals and antibodies to help to defend you from the gluten you just ate. And so you can get genetically tested to help you understand whether or not going on a gluten-free diet is a right move or a move in the right direction for you. So that's another test that you can look at.
And I hope nobody listening to this is going to take this as a license to just do something that's going to hurt them. But what you just described, when people eat something that bothers them, and then the body gets a little inflamed, repairs itself, and then everything's okay. So a person often wonders, what happened to me? I was fine before, and now I'm not. What you're describing is really, for every person, very different, and we all have to respect that. How long have we been injuring ourselves? How much are we doing that? And how vital is our whole body to be able to repair itself over and over again? I think in time, what you're talking about sounds to me like, as we get older and we break down and all these factors are there, it's more and more difficult for our body to repair itself. Is that fair to say?
Yes, in a way. So inflammation is normal. Inflammation is this normal process. It's how our body breaks down damaged and old cells and stimulates the regrowth of new cells to take those damaged cells' place, right? So we want inflammation to a certain degree. But chronic inflammation that's accelerated, that's too aggressive, puts your body in a repair deficit state. You basically break down faster than you're capable of rebuilding. And that's what disease is, in a nutshell. And so the reason I mention this, Jonathan, is because you said that as we get older, and so I want to just be clear about what I want the audience to understand. Aging does not cause damage, okay? Not in the classic sense that we all think. So many doctors will tell you, you're getting older, get used to it. And I hear, I get 30, 40-year-old people coming into my practice saying, well, the doc said I'm just getting older, I need to accept it. 30, 40 years old, that's not old, right? What it really is not aging, but it's accumulation of damage over time. So if we accumulate more damage over a compressed period of time, we're going to be more likely to develop cardiovascular disease or inflammation. So you have to ask yourself, what are the things that you're doing within your life that are creating the damage in that compression of time that's leading to that increased risk for you and potentially leading to a tissue or an organ breaking down. So lifestyle, right? Diet, sleep. How much do you sleep? How much stress are you under? How much sunshine do you get? What's the quality of the food that you're eating? Are you staying adequately hydrated? Do you exercise on a regular basis? Like, these things matter more than anything else as it relates to heart disease. And we know that for several reasons. One, prior to 1910, there was no such thing as a cardiologist, right? I mean, cardiology is a relatively new field, and it's a field of modern lifestyles, right? It's an expertise in medicine because of the convenience factors that we've created through food processing, through the way that we raise and grow our food, through the ways that we choose to live our lifestyles, right? So these things have become socially acceptable. Basically, hurting yourself over time has become the social norm, and so the outcome for that is an increase in inflammation and an increase in what we perceive to be cardiovascular disease.
So can we take a step back for a moment, maybe to help, especially those people who are new to this information? What are some of the biggest foods that are gluten-rich or, basically, bottom line, problematic for people?
So from a gluten perspective, the classic gluten-containing grains are wheat, barley, and rye. But then you have also oats, which is kind of on the fence. Some researchers say don't eat oats. Some say oats are safe. I'm on the side of oats are not. Oats have a gluten called avenin, which has been shown in multiple studies to create inflammatory damage to people who have a reaction to gluten. And then you have corn and rice, which are two of the primary grains that are used in every gluten-free food product from here to Timbuktu. And the reality is they're not really technically gluten-free. And that, we could go into that, but that's a really deep conversation. All grains have gluten, period. Right? The definition of gluten, of actual gluten, is that it's the storage proteins, it's the family of storage proteins found in the seeds of grass. Well, the seeds of grass are wheat, barley, rye, oats, corn, rice, sorghum, teff, millet, triticale. So you've got all these different forms of grain. Some are being classified by the FDA as gluten-free, even though technically, scientifically, they're not gluten-free. So a lot of people going on a gluten-free diet are confused. And so they end up going and buying a bunch of corn and rice-based products, and they wonder why they still feel bad, or they wonder why they're not getting better. So if we really just want to simplify what gluten is the family of proteins found in grains. So corn's not a vegetable, just newsflash, it's a grain. And so you have to look at corn-based products as part of that conundrum.
Well, they actually do say that corn is one of these things that make people allergic over time. The more you eat it, the more of a risk there is, or is it right away, as soon as somebody starts eating it, it's the same kind of reaction? How does somebody think about this?
So if you're talking about gluten, the more you eat it, gluten's a slow poison. It's not a fast poison unless you have if you're one of the few percentages of people that have a really acute response. There are people that when they get glutened, they're running to the toilet. I mean, they instant diarrhea, instant pain. And there's some people that maybe it doesn't affect their bowels, but it causes instant nerve pain or instant migraine headaches, like within minutes. Most people with gluten issues, it's a slow poison. And that's why it's hard to pick up on. That's why That's why you were asking me earlier. Yeah, I've been doing this my whole life. Why now? Why did it? Is this the culmination of something that's new, or is this something I've been doing all along? And it's my body has been so resilient up to this point, but now it's starting to break down. And gluten works that way. Generally, it's a slow poison. The more you eat over time, the more inflammation you produce. The more inflammation you produce, the more work you give your body to do. If you're also neglecting your body in other ways, that work for your body gets harder and harder and harder, and then it starts to break down.
Yeah, so some of the symptoms, again, like you say, that are hard for people to pick up. I have a headache. They attribute it to a stressful day, or they're tired. These are common symptoms that quite potentially, right, if they were to just really be more mindful about how much grain they're eating, they reduce it and their energy is going up. That's telling you something, right?
Yeah, I mean, always rule number one, right? Cardinal rule of nutrition. Well, there's 3 rules I like to live by. You can't get healthy or stay healthy eating food that isn't healthy. And so to understand that rule, you have to answer the question honestly. So we all know that soda isn't healthy, right? Now we can lie to ourselves and we can say, oh, it's just one, right? But it's not healthy. Processed sugar is not healthy. It's not good for anybody, not even small amounts. So answering that first rule honestly, you can't get healthy eating food that's not healthy. So before you eat it, ask yourself, truly ask yourself and answer the question honestly, is it healthy? Rule number 2, pay attention. If you feel bad when you eat it, that's your body trying to tell you something. That's your body communicating to you, this is probably not something you should consume. And then rule number 3 is when rule number 1 and rule number 2, if you're following those really, really well and you're still struggling, is to test, right? Test for food sensitivity, test for food allergy, test for food intolerance. They're different. They're not all the same. A food allergy, most people equate a food allergy to the lip swelling and the hives breaking out on the skin. If you've got that going on, you know it. You don't need anybody to tell you with a test. But food reactivity occurs within a window of immediate all the way up to 3 weeks. And so some foods can create just kind of low levels of inflammation, and the inflammatory response can go on just kind of subtly. And inflammation is a silent killer. Inflammation, contributes to cancer and heart disease and pretty much every other chronic degenerative disease. And so if the food that you're eating is contributing to that inflammation and you're not even really aware of it because it's a subtle low-grade inflammation and you're just used to feeling bad kind of all the time because, health is relative. Like if you've never, first of all, if a person's never been healthy, like optimally, they don't even know what they're missing, right? So their norm is, well, I grew up with headaches or I grew up with this problem or that problem. I always thought it was normal for me. So the key is, it's at the end of the day, you want to try to choose healthy foods. And if you are doing that and you're making every conscientious effort that you can, you have to understand that people are also unique. And some people are allergic or sensitive or intolerant to different foods or different compounds found in foods or to pesticides or to different things that are in the foods that we use to preserve them. And so you can pay attention, but if you feel bad and you can't quite pinpoint it, there are tests that can be used, going back to testing, that you can ask your doctor to run that can measure for food sensitivity, that can measure for whether or not you're reacting to the preservative in the food or the pesticide in the food, etc. And that way you can be more selective about how you eat.
And just again to clarify how gluten is damaging the cardiovascular system, would you say number 1, it's how it affects in the gut, what's happening there, or how do you see it with your practice with all the people you've been seeing?
Generally speaking, gluten's claim to fame is that it causes inflammation, right? Just if we're just talking about gluten and we're not talking about other properties of grain, right? Just gluten itself, it causes inflammation. And there's multiple ways we know it can. One is it can produce, it can incite your body to produce antibodies against you. And some of those antibodies are antibodies against your heart. And this is where we'll see disease like pericarditis in somebody who's gluten sensitive because they're actually creating antibodies against their own heart tissue or against their own vascular tissue. We know that can happen. But then there's also another side to this, is gluten causes inflammation in other ways. There are these little receptors that we have in our immune system. They're called toll-like receptors, or TLRs. These receptors are incited by gluten. There's actually great research that a number of doctors did, not myself, but great research, and they've identified these toll-like receptors as being kind of a mechanism of action of how gluten incites an inflammatory response in the body. But then there's another mechanism aside from toll-like receptors, and that is gluten docks, or it binds to what's called an HLA-DQ receptor. So there's toll-like receptors and there are HLA-DQ receptors. Now, I said earlier that you could test yourself for genetics, HLA-DQ. It's not a coincidence, right? Those genes code for these antennas. These antennas are little antennas. They sit on the surface of your immune cells. And what they do is they help your body identify what is good for you and what is not good for you. Because if it identifies a threat, then it grabs onto it. It kind of binds or grabs onto it, and it presents that object or that protein or whatever it is, in this case gluten, it presents it to your immune cells. And then your immune cells look at it and they start making chemicals to try to protect you against it. And so that chemical cascade, these are chemicals like interferon and tumor necrosis factor alpha. Like, these chemicals can also be measured. So if you are trying to say, okay, do I have an increased risk for developing heart disease? Doc, let's just do a full workup. We can do homocysteine. They can measure TNF alpha. They can measure interferon. They can also measure other chemicals like C-reactive protein. And if you're going to look at C-reactive protein, make sure there's 2 varieties of that test. Ask for HS C-reactive protein. The HS stands for high sensitivity. It's more accurate. So, again, just for clarity's sake, ask your doctor for an HS CRP. Homocysteine can be measured. TNF alpha can be measured. You can have your gluten sensitivity genes measured. Like, these are all great places to start to try to help you assess whether or not you have an increased risk for inflammation.
Just as we're finishing up for the next several minutes, I'm also just thinking about how little of a connection is made by most conventional docs who have presented to them people that have all kinds of infections. And obviously an infection in and around the heart is a serious thing. But here it is, you're talking about how eating too much gluten, too many grains, causes this inflammation in the body. And that has to put you at a greater risk for any of these infections to be causing a problem in the body, right?
Well, any time that your immune system is preoccupied by attacking your food, remember the point of eating is to nourish you. And look, there's good and bad in every food, to be frank. But the job of your GI tract, if it's healthy, is it separates the good from the bad. Your gut's like this long tube from your mouth to your anus. It's a quarantine zone, right? Here we are in COVID, right? But your gut is a quarantine zone. It separates things in your food like the bacteria or yeast or molds that are in that food. And it kind of puts them over to one side, but then it extrapolates the vitamins, the minerals, the carbs, fats, and proteins, and amino acids, and nucleic acids, the nutrients, right? And it allows those guys through. It says, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay, and it opens the gate and allows those ones through. And it says, you're not okay, you're not okay, you're going to form poop, and we're going to put you out on the other side. But if your body is so busy attacking the food, which is supposed to nourish you, then it over time it loses its ability. It loses its resources, right? Its resources become diminished. The immune system resources, remember 70% of the immune system is concentrated in the GI tract for a reason, right? It's called the GALT, the gastro-associated lymphoid tissue. That tissue is designed to protect you from potential dangerous things in your food. But if your food is dangerous because you're eating dangerous things, right, then you wear down that GALT tissue, and now you're more susceptible to things like you said, like infections, right? So now those bacteria that are in your food, those viruses, those fungal microorganisms, parasitic microorganisms, now instead of your gut's immune system being able to like slap them around and get them out of you, right? Now they're allowed to kind of grow and build a little army, right? And get a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger, and then they bore holes in your GI tract, otherwise known as leaky gut, right? Or intestinal hyperpermeability. And now they're going systemic. Now they're getting in you. And it's not necessarily like a systemic infection. It's not like anaphylaxis or septic shock. It's not septicemia. You're not in the emergency room with 105 fever. But it's just little bacteria byproducts, right? Little bacterial missiles. They just float around and cause inflammation everywhere. And some of these bacterial byproducts, they're called lipopolysaccharides. They actually can travel to your heart, and they can damage your heart, and they can damage your blood vessels. They can damage any tissue in your body once they have access to the bloodstream.
Is it way out in left field to say that this constantly eating of food like a glutinous food, too many grains, causing this inflammation. Then what you just described, boring holes, opening up the doorway where anything can get through and cause more injury to the vessels. Could this be a reason why so many people actually do get a lot of plaque? Because I've heard in the past how many physicians I've interviewed have talked about how the body is just trying to stay okay. Like putting plaque in there is like plaster of Paris trying to repair the injury. It could be as simple as, like you say, eating the wrong food. And I know it seems cliche-ish, right, to say, oh, you know, your diet has a lot to do with your health. But in this case, you really are crystallizing it, where somebody could be injuring themselves so much over and over again that they're actually increasing their risk of getting plaque.
Absolutely. I mean, what is plaque, right? Plaque is a deposition of materials in the lining of the blood vessel, in the lining of the blood vessel, and it's basically what's happening is you have inflammation, and that inflammation does damage, and then your body responds to that damage by laying down fatty deposits, cholesterol deposits, lipoproteins, calcium. Those are called plaques. You know, a lot of doctors have gone the route of demonizing cholesterol, which is, you know, a whole nother ballgame we could get into if you'd like, but cholesterol's not evil. Cholesterol's the mother hormone. You need cholesterol to make estrogen, to make testosterone, to make progesterone. Cholesterol helps you fight infection. Cholesterol is very, very important substance. And for men with cholesterol under 150, they have higher suicide rates, higher risk of depression. Cholesterol won a Nobel Prize in medicine in 1998 because it was discovered that you need it to form brain synapses. So this whole battle on cholesterol, in my opinion, is long overdue to have another conversation about, right? So it's not the cholesterol is just doing its job. It's seeing where the inflammation is and it's saying, hey, let's not let you have an internal rupture of that blood vessel and bleed out. Let's clog that hole, right? But over time, if your behavior doesn't change, if you continue to eat poorly and you continue to create vascular inflammation through your diet, then that plaque just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Well, again, most doctors are going to blame the plaque instead of blaming why the plaque is being laid down. And we really want to go back and we want to look at root cause versus symptomatic suppression. And root cause is identify the source of the inflammation or the overly aggressive inflammation and adjust your behavior so that it's not happening anymore. Because if you do that, your body can heal and repair itself.
That's what I want to finish with. 30 seconds, really ending on a hopeful message. If you take this message seriously, you can reverse this kind of damage to the cardiovascular system, right?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, the simplest way to put it is if you get a cut, it will bleed. Will it heal? Of course it will. The only reason a cut wouldn't heal is if every time it started to scab, you ripped the scab off, right? Or took another knife and cut yourself again. So think of eating, if you're eating the wrong foods, as perpetually cutting yourself and not allowing yourself to heal. But if you change your diet, your body already knows how to heal.
I hope you're enjoying the Cardiovascular DocuClass. As a friendly reminder, be sure to watch the second video on this page. And also, if you'd like to own a copy of this event, plus all the other bonuses available today, simply click the link below and choose the package that best fits your needs. Talk to you soon. Take care.